Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about intelligence analysis. Now mind you, we're talking about intelligence analysis as a topic under the course Introduction to Intelligence and Security Studies. And like I told you guys in the previous classes, I purposely left intelligence analysis, to be a topic on its own, or rather than treating it under the intelligence cycle, simply because intelligence analysis is a very broad area. In fact, there are so many other courses you're going to take just to make sure you grasp what intelligence analysis is all about. It's a very wide area. However, this topic we're going to try and introduce the concept of intelligence analysis, try and take you through the methodology, the analytical tradecraft, those techniques that intelligence analysis is, those techniques that we use in doing intelligence analysis. Now, before we proceed, I'd like to give us a recap. We tried to define intelligence analysis. Sorry, we tried to define intelligence. We gave a background, and we talked about the intelligence process, the requirement stage, the collection stage, the processing stage. I taught you guys how to evaluate your source, to ascertain the reliability, proximity, appropriateness, and all of that. I went ahead to treat the sources of intelligence. Now, having said that, you are aware what intelligence is. You have acquired information, you have processed it, you have collected, you have processed. The next stage is you analyze. Now remember where I said you don't just collect information and sit on it, or you don't just collect information and act on it, you don't just receive information and act on it. Information is unprocessed data, raw information. Now, it has to pass through the stage of analysis for it to become what? Intelligence. Now, I remember clearly when I talked about a formula saying information plus analysis equals intelligence. This is the center of intelligence, the analysis stage. Before you do anything, before you actualize what you know as actionable intelligence, it has to pass through the rigor of the intelligence process, the center of which is analysis, the most important component. Mind you, we're not trying to say other components such as the requirement, the collection, the processing stage are useless. No. But when you say something is the center, is the hub, it's just like an automobile. You say this part is useful, the other part is not so useful. Without this part, you could find your way around. Without analysis, you are most likely to arrive at when they do elections and they say inconclusive, that kind of thing. You're most likely to arrive at inconclusive conclusions. I don't know how that sounds. First of all, before we understand what intelligence analysis is all about, I like to explain, or establish rather, that most importantly, you have to have an understanding of the workings of the human mind, because by the by, intelligence analysis is a function of the mind. No matter regardless of what method you are trying to adopt or what method I teach you, it all comes down to your mind. Now there are certain cognitive impediments to intelligence analysis. When you say something is cognitive, cognition, that's your mental process. Your mental cognition comes from mental action. When you begin to think about something, you begin to process something in your brain, that's a cognitive process. Now, intelligence analysis is done by who? By the human beings, alright? We say, my mind is not settled with this, my mind is not okay with this, my mind is not okay with that. What is the mind? Where is the mind located? There are so many arguments as to, whether the mind is abstract, or whether the mind is part of the body or independent of itself. I don't want to go into the mind body controversy, but I like to establish that critical to intelligence analysis is an understanding of the workings of the mind. The mind is poorly wired to deal with some inherent and induced uncertainties. Now, as a human being, we all have tendencies to be biased. That is the first problem you have coming from the mind. You are analyzing an issue, you tend to lean towards your bias. You have an already held judgment which is difficult to defeat. I would recommend the book Psychology of Intelligence Analysis by Richard Howard, wherein he tried to establish a link between intelligence analysis and the mind, the human mind. First of all, he tried to talk about there's a topic there, thinking about thinking. How do you think? Intelligence analysis is dependent on our ability to think, right? Now, how do you think? You think about your thinking process, perception. Why can't we see what is there to be seen? For you to analyze, you must have seen. And then for you to analyze, you need to look beyond what you're seeing. Now, why can't we see what is there to be seen? Those are some areas, And when you have conflicting viewpoints or conflicting informations in this case, how do you, sieve out the one you should act on, or the one you should analyze, and the one you should not? Those are some of the problems. Those are some of the impediments inherent in human mental processes. Our mind is created so by God. It's a follow-come problem. I should use that language. Everybody has it. I'll give you an example. You're given a case to handle, and probably it's between another tribe and your own tribe. If you've heard of you're doing sociology, introduction to sociology now, so you must have heard about ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. So you have that cultural bias in you, and despite the fact that your own culture or your own ethnic group is the one that is wrong in such a case, your mind is wired to first of all see evidence that confirms the innocence of your own group. I hope you're following. Now, those are what? Human mental processes. They are all, those are human, should I say, human errors. They're inherent in all of us. Now, for you to be an analyst, for you to be able to analyze intelligence effectively, you must first of all do away with any form of bias. You must not be biased. Be it personal connection, emotional attachment. You should be able to analyze an issue and tell your wife or your girlfriend that, come, you're wrong in this. That is from that point you become an analyst. You don't allow those factors that come to cloud your judgment. No, you stand your ground. When you have issues at hand, you look at facts. You look at the center of the argument, the weight, the logic behind it. When you get to 200 level, I'll teach you guys a course, critical thinking and analysis, where I'm going to take time in details and break down how the human mind affects intelligence analysis, or how important it is to understand the workings of our mind in intelligence analysis. And there's also another course by my prof, intelligence analysis. Yes, I said this is just a topic. I'm just supposed to introduce you guys to intelligence analysis and some of its methodological components. Those are some of the things. Now, forgive me, it's 3 a.m. That's one of the benefits of working from home. You get to choose when to work and when not to work. I prefer to work in the middle of the night, so I'll be sleeping all throughout the day. Now, analysis stage is the stage, where we filter information, we refine it, we transform information into intelligence. It's the filtration stage where intelligence becomes finished, through a refining process that involve a lot of additions and subtractions, a lot of cognitive processes, as earlier established. You think, you add some facts, you remove some, useless information, probably strategically useful. Now, intelligence analysis is aimed at refining gathered and processed information such that it is actionable. I keep saying you cannot act on information. And I remember saying if you act on information that is unprocessed, if you have any result at all, it is most likely to be, disastrous or destructive. Somebody comes to give you a piece of information about, say, your fiancé. Let me use a social example. Somebody comes to give you an information that your fiancé is cheating on you. That's information, alright? Probably a false one. It's wrong. It's a lie. And you decide to act on that. You're acting on raw information, raw data, unprocessed. If you have any result, maybe you would damage a marriage that would have been successful, or any chance you would have had. Anyway, back to intelligence analysis. Intelligence analysis is simply a refining stage of intelligence. It defines what intelligence is. It is the stage where information is transformed into actionable intelligence, through additions and subtractions, reasonable ones, logical ones, using analytical methods and techniques, some of which I'm going to talk about today. Mind you, this is an introduction to intelligence analysis. It's going to take you a lot of semesters to be done with intelligence analysis. You're going to do intelligence analysis, report writing and briefing. You're going to do criminal intelligence analysis. You're going to do critical thinking and analysis. There's another course, about 4 courses on intelligence analysis. So it's not something you learn in one class. So I like to go straight to the point. One of the first ones is now, virtually all techniques hover around, reasoning, like I said, mental process. And if you're reasoning, I'm taking you back to logic now. There are, let's say, 2 ways to do that. We have the inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Now, taking you back to GST 112, philosophy and logic. I'm sure you must have been taught what an argument is. And I know if it were to be a class, now people will lie and say nobody has taught you that. And anyway, we have 2 types of reasoning in logic: inductive and deductive. I want to explain the logical aspect before I apply it to intelligence analysis. Now, what is an argument? An argument in logic is simply a sort of claims that are put together to support a logical conclusion. What is a claim? A statement that is either true or false. I give you an example. All novena students are intelligent. That's a claim, and that's a statement, that's a proposition, alright? And we say James is a novena student. That's a premise now, right? A statement. Statement 1 is all novena students are intelligent. Statement 2 is James is a novena student. Now, what logical conclusion could we draw from that? We could say, therefore, James is intelligent, alright? That's a typical example of an argument in logic. What's the applicability of this in intelligence analysis? You're sieving through a body of information. You're analyzing general issues to come to a specific conclusion. That's what? From general to specific. That's deductive reasoning. You're deducting from, from general issues, to come to a specific conclusion. In that kind of analysis, you're doing deductive reasoning. But when you're inducing, you're gathering information from source A, source B, source C, D, E, F. So, fuse them together and come up with an actionable intel. That's inductive. You're inducing, deducing and inducing, those 2 keywords. Now, we're limiting them to reasoning in logic simply because it's all, it all takes place in the human mind. Reasoning, how do you reason? You think now, right? How do you think now? If you're thinking, I give you guys an example using logic, using logical arguments. So the first one of them all is reasoning, inductive and deductive reasoning. Now, basically, those are the two patterns, of reasoning as regards intelligence analysis. Now, mind you, every other form of intelligence analysis, virtually all of them, it's either you're reasoning inductively or deductively. Now, how do you think? From the beginning, I established that intelligence analysis is more of a cognitive activity. Every form of intelligence analysis, is dependent on the mind. So, how does the mind think? How does the mind reason? You're either thinking in the inductive way or the deductive way. Now, inductive reasoning, like I said, is from specific to general. I gave you example using logic, introduction to philosophy and logic. I'm sure you were taught inductive and deductive arguments. Now, I give you another example. When you have a set of events, unfolding, just like we have corona pandemic now everywhere, and it's changing the totality of the world order, from political aspect, economic aspect, and what have you. Now, you look at those things and you make deductions. Now you're analyzing, all right? You come up with conclusions. Events are unfolding every day. Now we're hearing China is planning to jettison the use of the US dollar in their international transactions. You look at all of those issues. You come up with deductions. You make meaning out of it. What does that mean to Nigeria? What implication does it have to our economy or to the political system of Nigeria? The international system. You look at all of those things. Your reasoning, all right? Deductive reasoning. Now, inductive reasoning, you look at a set of individual events, probably unrelated. Now, your ability to relate events, unrelated events, your ability to connect the dots, it's something you have to cultivate if you must be a good analyst. As an intelligence analyst, you should be able to be inductive at all times. In fact, some scholars argue that inductive reasoning is the bottom of intelligence analysis. You have to be able to connect events. Something is going on in Kaduna, something is going on in Kwara State, something is going on in Kogi. An ordinary person does not see the connection, but you should be able to sit down and analyze, induce, connect the dots. In fact, one of the causes of intelligence failure is, failure to connect the dots. When you have set of events unfolding every day, you should be able to look at those events and find out what connection is there, if any, and the security implication of such connections. Now let's practicalize analysis, some inductive analysis. Look at some chain of events. If you've been following up the Islamic movement of Nigeria and the case of Al-Zazaki and the Nigerian government, you would realize that we have so much information lying there that people are not paying attention to. Now, I would run you through the timeline. I think sometime in July 2014, there was a clash between the Nigerian army and the Islamic movement of Nigeria. That video that went viral of the chief of army staff trying to make his way through a particular road that they were worshipping, and it became a problem. They were carrying out a ritual there. That was the first clash they had, and shortly after, I think the same year or 2015, Al-Zazaki and his wife were arrested and beaten in the process, injured. Now, you look at these two events separately, right? You make meaning out of them, you reason. We're looking at separate events now. Remember, when we're reasoning in an inductive way, we're taking specific events to come to a general conclusion. And also remember that the cardinal aim of intelligence analysis, or even intelligence, is to to predict an event. So we're doing inductive analysis right now, and you can also call it predictive analysis. In 2016, on the same case, the High Court of Nigeria ordered the release of Al-Zazaki. In January 2017, Amnesty International also demanded that federal government complies with these directives or the court order. Now, these are all chain of events, happening over the years. And in between all those events, you hear of protests here and there, protests in Kano, protests in Kaduna, protests in Abuja. All those are, signs that, or pieces of information that an analyst should look at and, run them through your brain, do some analysis and come up with reasonable conclusions as to what dangers they portray to national security. In January 2017, there was an order and there was no release. The same year, 2017, I was in Abuja with my HOD on an official assignment, Professor Dan Inte, and we witnessed a very strange celebration of Eid al-Maulud. Now, the Eid al-Maulud is one of the festivals that Muslims celebrate. With so many years of living in Abuja since the 90s till that moment, I had never seen such a crowd for the celebration of Maulud. And suddenly we were driving in town, and everywhere we get to, is blocked, and we're wondering what is going on. And I said, Prof, this thing that they are doing, I've never seen something like this before. And then he laughed and said, you think this is Maulud celebration? People came to Abuja filled in trailers. You can imagine, to come and celebrate Maulud in Abuja. That's puzzling. You see something wrong with that. Why not celebrate Maulud in Kano as usual? Why not celebrate it in Zaria as usual? Why not celebrate it in Borno State or wherever you are as usual? But then they came in thousands. Now they are coming to Abuja to celebrate Maulud. And HOD said, this is not just Maulud, I see people gathering, for something. People are coming together to meet, to achieve a particular goal. And just shortly after that, we began to see protests in Abuja. A lot of protests. Sometimes they go violent. They come and they have some physical confrontations and issues with the police. Now, all those are events, specific events that may look unconnected, unrelated, or that an ordinary person would not see, the future, the likely future scenario that would come out of that. Now, just shortly after, some months after that, I think 2018, in the month of July, we heard that 7 policemen have been gunned down in in Galadimawa on the streets of Abuja. And as you would expect, their arms have been taken. We said, well, we began to see the connection, between these events. I'm sure by now you're already getting some links through this timeline, the chronological sequence. You imagine 7 policemen taken down and their arms, seized. Why would somebody go and kill 7 policemen at such a random area? Did they have problem with the 7 policemen? Of course, they were looking for weapons. For what purpose? I leave you to think about that. Now, in January 2019, the High Court in Kaduna also, sat on the issue of Al-Zazaki and the federal government to see how or if they can be granted bail. Just shortly after, we also heard of protests in Kaduna State Government House, around the government house, where 2 people died and about 40 arrested. And all these protests have been going on and on and on and on. Now, I refer you back to the case of Boko Haram. If you remember how Boko Haram started, Boko Haram was a peaceful, a peaceful movement until there was decapitation. When you decapitate, you cut off the head. Unknown to the government, sometimes that when you do decapitation, you don't necessarily end the problem. You just open a can of worms. So they killed the then leader of Boko Haram, and Muhammad Yusuf, and 2, 3, 4 more heads grew, more violent heads. Just like you're growing a flower and you cut the flower, that branch you're cutting will produce 2, 3, 4 more that will still grow taller than that one and produce even more leaves, more branches. So that is it. And now we are confronted with the issue of Islamic movement of Nigeria. As an analyst, given these events, these specific events, now you can sit down and do some inductive reasoning, and you should be able to. It's not my job to do in this video to tell you what I think of what I think would be the outcome of these events, but you should reason, use your own reasoning, and what you would be doing is inductive reasoning, because you're looking at specific events pointing towards what you think about that. You also mirror some other situations that have happened in the past that are similar and what came out of those. Now with that, you can sit down and write intelligence report, more of a warning or predictive report, or a report based on predictive analysis, write and submit to your federal government as to what you think, what dangers you think these events portray, and what measures should be put in place to curb or to prevent the occurrence of whatever dangers you are foreseeing. That's inductive analysis. Deductive analysis, you're looking at a general issue, to make deductions from it. You can also read on the Arab Spring. That's also another very good point, another very good example, how the Arab Spring started, and the events that came with it. That's for inductive and deductive reasoning and its applicability in intelligence analysis. I would still, briefly take you back to logic so you can always remember. Inductive reasoning is from specific to general. For example, the first cat is white, the second cat is white, the third cat is white. Therefore, the fourth cat is also white. Now, you're using three cats because the three cats are white. I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm just giving you an example. It's not enough to conclude. There is possibility of error, but you're moving from specific premises to general conclusion. John is a novena student. John is intelligent. Therefore, all novena students are intelligent. You see, we're using John to draw a conclusion on all novena students. The reverse of that, if we're being deductive, is to say, one, all novena students are intelligent, and two, John is a novena student. Three, therefore John is intelligent. Now, when you're dealing with arguments, when you're analyzing arguments, we always try to prefer deductive arguments. They are more, when you get to the higher level of logic, we're going to teach you sound arguments and strong arguments, weak arguments, logical arguments, the valid and invalid arguments. That's not for now, but for intelligence, sometimes we prefer to be inductive, because we try to connect the dots. The ability for us to satisfy the predictive or preventive element of intelligence is our ability to connect the dots, link A, B, C, D, and find out what is next in the sequence. So that's that for inductive and deductive reasoning. We also have analyses of competing hypotheses. This was developed by Richard Howard in his Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. Now, analysis of competing hypotheses simply means matching or comparing, hypotheses that seem to be conflicting or competing rather. You have hypotheses that all make sense to you. You try to make sense out of, you analyze them, and you come up with which one you see to be more realistic, or which one you see to be more plausible. Now, a hypothesis, in primary school they used to tell us a hypothesis is simply a guess, when you make a guess. And we could say a hypothesis is an assumption. In this context, we're referring to predictive or analytical assumptions, when you make tentative propositions that could either be true or false. Now, you remember from our explanation of intelligence requirement, I gave some requirements as example, and I mentioned find out where Shekau lives, or find out if Shekau is alive. And that's it. That's an intelligence requirement. Assuming you've explored all your intelligence sources and you've come up with information as regards all those things, and perhaps your 2, 3, 4 analysts trying to analyze such information. Now, mind you, everyone is going to have their own hypothesis, and everyone is coming with their own explanation of that intelligence requirement. Shekau is alive, Shekau is not alive, he is alive, he lives in point A, he lives in point B. All those are hypotheses, for instance. Now, you have competing hypotheses. One says he is alive, the other says he's not alive, or one says he lives in Jacana, the other one says he's not alive. Those are competing hypotheses. Why? Because you can't be dead and be living somewhere. One says he's alive, the other says one says he's dead rather, the other says he's living. This is where he is living. If he is dead, that is if analyst A is correct that Shekau is dead, then analyst B cannot be correct that Shekau is living in Jacana. If analyst B is correct that Shekau lives in Jacana, then analyst A cannot be correct, or hypothesis 1 cannot be correct. So there you have competing hypotheses. One disproves of the other. Now, in doing analysis of competing hypotheses, you have unproven and disproved hypotheses. Now, mind you, we're only introducing you to the concept of intelligence analysis. You would be taught all these methods proper when you get to a higher level, when you're doing advanced intelligence analysis. But then these are the basics. Unproven hypothesis. Now, when you have all your hypotheses, when you have all your hypotheses lined up, you have unproven ones. Those are the ones that you've not seen evidence that confirms them yet. They are unproven. Then disproved hypotheses are the ones that you've already seen evidence that disconfirms them, that disproves them, disputes them. For instance, in the case of the two hypotheses we're using as an example, the case of Shekau being alive or Shekau being dead or living in Jacana or not. Now, if we say Shekau lives in Jacana, that's an unproven hypothesis now, right? We've not seen evidence that he actually lives there. It's unproven. It becomes intelligence if we can actually go there and find out and verify that he lives there, or we can have strongly confirming information backed up by facts or direct information, from a very reliable source. Or maybe if we have imagery intelligence, geospatial intelligence, and all of that, factual evidence that confirms that hypothesis, that makes it what? Proved. That's the third category. It's either unproven, disproved, or proven. That's the one that you have proof for. Now, if it's unproven, it's open, all right. But if it is disproved, then it becomes useless. You don't have to even analyze a hypothesis that is disproved. Shekau is living in Jacana. If we find out, if we come across evidence that confirms or that supports the hypothesis that he actually lives in Jacana, it therefore means that the hypothesis that Shekau is dead is disproved, because he cannot be dead and still living in Jacana. So that's it with analysis of competing hypotheses and unproven, disproved, and proved or proven hypothesis. Mind you, in exam you should expect some practical questions where you might be asked to analyze some issues, or I may give you a storyline and ask you to deduce some hypothesis from there and come up with some unproven or disproved hypothesis, to practicalize or to showcase your understanding of the concept of analysis of competing hypotheses. Another very important one is Linchpin analysis. Linchpin analysis is somewhat similar to analysis of competing hypotheses. They all deal with the use of hypothesis. Now, from the word linchpin, if you look at the word linchpin, if you know how trucks are being made, the local trucks we have here in Nigeria now, apart from the bolt they use in tying the spindle, there's usually a pin that holds the assembly together. I will try and show you an example. That's a linchpin. That's what holds the assembly together. Now, linchpin analysis. The word linchpin, this, it refers to something that is vital, something that is important. In the case of intelligence analysis, it simply means anchoring your intelligence analysis on information that is known, known facts. Is more of a predictive kind of analysis, but in this case, contrary to or different from analysis of competing hypotheses. In analysis of competing hypotheses, you could be dealing with all unproven hypotheses, but in this case, you're starting with known information. The one the one you have. It's factual. You have evidence. It's confirmed. So this makes linchpin analysis more of inductive. you bring together your linchpins or your factual information, the confirmed ones, your hypotheses. Let me call them hypotheses, facts. Now, when you have those confirmed hypotheses, they become your linchpin drivers. They are the base upon which your intelligence analysis, they are the trust, they are the drivers of your intelligence analysis. So any other information you're gathering, your analysis, your intelligence analysis is subject to. Now we have confirmation that Shekau lives in Jakana. We received such information that there's actually visual contact. It's for sure, and we're carrying out analysis on that. Now, every information we're receiving that disputes or disproves the fact that Shekau lives in Jakana, because we have evidence. We believe he actually lives there. So our analysis is actually anchored on the fact that he lives there. We do away with any information that comes as just a diversion, or a deliberate attempt, or an act of deception, a deceptive operation on the other part. Now, that is not to say that linchpin drivers or linchpin assumptions or hypotheses are not subject to tests, but for them to qualify in the first place as linchpin drivers, for us to actually do linchpin analysis, we must have that factual information, information that is known, verified. Now, every other dimension that we're adding, or any other hypothesis that comes, should be in support of that information, because we already know that this is what is on ground. So that becomes our driver. We're analyzing from that perspective. That's all about linchpin analysis. Like I said, this is just an introductory class. When you get to advanced intelligence analysis, you would be taught these things practically, in details, all the analytical methods. Another very important one is linchpin analysis. Now, for the spider diagram, it has quite a number of names. Some people call it the spider diagram, some call it the spider chart. Some places you see mind mapping or crime chart. Some say the detective's wall, some say the spy wall. It all means the same thing, so you don't get confused. For your level, you don't really have to bother yourself with the technical differences between all of these. I will try as much as possible to be as brief as necessary, because like I said earlier, this is just introduction to all of these concepts. Now, spider diagram can simply be described as a chart that depicts or shows the relationship between events or objects, persons, etc., so as to enable the intelligence operative or the detective, to have a clearer picture of the likely future scenario. And like you can see in these pictures, they have different pictures of different events or persons. They're trying to make connections. I'm sure you must have seen these things in the movies, where they try to get pictures of different events or different persons. They try and establish connection, they try and put dates and all of that. Now, that's you trying to create a mental picture. What is in your mind, sometimes you're trying to process it and it's difficult, but when you do a mind map of it, when you do a spider diagram of it, you're looking at it clearly now, so you can have a clearer picture, a physical picture, and you would use that in your analysis. It can be used, to predict likely future scenario, or help us in cracking an ongoing criminal investigation. Now, spider diagram for intelligence analysis, it gives the analyst the ability to illustrate vividly his mental picture. That is why it's called mind mapping, like I said earlier. This way you can sit down and look at what is in your mind with your eyes and be able to identify connections and analytical errors. The most times the memory is trickish, but when you're looking at something, it's easier. If you're thinking and all those pictures are coming to your head. Sometimes when you're thinking, when you're processing, when you're reasoning, when you're analyzing something, there is always, in fact, there's always this mental picture. Now imagine you could have that all mapped out, and you're not bugging yourself with memories. You're just bugging yourself with pure analysis, because you're looking at it on the surface level. Initially you would be dealing with both memory factor and analysis factor, but having mapped it out physically, you're only dealing with analysis. And then most interestingly is the fact that you can have other analysts, assist you in analyzing what is in your mind, thereby yielding more efficient and timely results. When you're doing analysis and it's just you, it's in your brain, you don't see some analytical errors. But when you have it all laid out, all your cards are spread, and you have some other analysts look at those things, they try to help you establish more links that you didn't see before. If you've played some from puzzle games, you see sometimes the thing is right in front of you, but you can't connect it, you can't connect the dot. But when somebody helps you look at it, the person just gets it right away, either because you've already done something, or the person is looking at an angle you have not looked at before. So that's it about spider diagram or mind mapping and its applicability in intelligence analysis. When you get to the higher level, we'll go further. Another very important form of intelligence analysis is the statistical method. Now, from the word statistics, I'm sure you already have an idea. Statistical intelligence analysis is simply the use of figures, arithmetics, figures and numbers. It deals with figures. Now, this is mostly done in two ways. It's either you're analyzing intelligence statistically, or you're processing intelligence that comes in numerical form, or I should say in form of statistical data. I give you an example. We have departments that dedicate time to come up with criminal intelligence statistics. All the crimes that occur, all the crimes that are reported to police stations are being recorded by some persons. These crimes are being, tabulated. They come up with statistical data. Why? So that they do statistical analysis and come up with criminal intelligence. How does data on, just the number of crimes and their, should I say, taxonomy, how does it help in formulation of intelligence? It's simple. In Delta State, for instance, you have 100 murders in 1 year. You have burglary, there are 50. You have theft. You have assassination. Mind you, there's a difference between murder and assassination. You would learn that. Now, all those figures, attached to different kinds of crimes that are being committed by different persons at different times within the year. At the end of the year, or at the end of the month, depending on the agency, you sit down and you analyze those statistical data. You look at the percentage. This is the crime with the highest. This is the crime with the highest percentage. This is the crime with the lowest percentage. This crime was committed in so area. All those data would help you, in drafting out policy. We said intelligence is used to support policy formulation. You create policies in the same direction. The policy maker now knows that there is high level of murder, or the kind of crimes we're facing in Delta State are not crimes against humanity. They're probably organized crimes, and we should therefore channel more resources towards uh, the management or prevention of such crimes. You have such data on your own, say for instance, and you decide to write a report to the Commissioner of Police that, dear sir, we have statistical data that suggests that personnel are being disproportionately or wrongly deployed. What I mean is, by your statistical analysis, you find out we have more of organized crime, and you find out most of the police men on duty are being sent on counter-terrorism operations, or to gather information about counter-terrorism, or about terrorism, rather, terrorist activities going on in the area. Now, despite the fact that there is the general duty of police that is That is the primary role of every police officer on the road. You're primarily sent to go and look for information or to go on counter-terrorism operations. Meanwhile, the kind of crimes that have the highest occurrence in your state are transnational crimes. That's probably, or should we say, just plainly waste of resources or poor utilization of resources. So those are some of the things. Statistical analysis. There are so many ways of doing statistical analysis. In fact, simple percentage is one of them. When you get to the higher levels, you'll be taught ways to analyze your responses, your data when you're doing your research. Research is purely investigation. How do you analyze data? There are so many ways of doing them. We have chi-square, correlation, regression, simple percentage, t-test. There are so many ways of doing them. You can apply all those to intelligence analysis. Also, remember when I was talking about sources of intelligence, I remember mentioning geospatial intelligence and even explaining it extensively. Now, some geospatial intelligence comes mostly in form of data that requires some statistics. Remember the example of geodata that comes from your LiDAR technology, light detection and ranging, that tells you distance from point A to point B, or you have a map. Very good, you have a map from probably your drone or any other UAV, and it's showing you some coordinates, distance from point A to point B. This is, now mind you, every map has a scale, and you don't know the statistical tools to use, to convert the 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 distance you're seeing on the map, probably in meters or in centimeters, to kilometers, to have a mental picture of the kind of operation you're to embark on. Now, those are some of the ways we use statistical analysis, statistical tools in analyzing intelligence. Now, what is your source there is geospatial intelligence. Now, right, you've received geospatial information through GeoInt, and now you are tasked with the responsibility of analyzing it using what? Statistical method, statistical tools. Also remember the example we gave of radar, radio detection and ranging. You use your radar technology to acquire distance of a drone that an enemy is trying to use in attacking you, and you're probably sitting with your AK-47 that is limited to 400 meters effective range. For you to be able to calculate those data that you're getting from all the technology at your disposal, you need to have some statistical knowledge. Now, all this being said, the primary essence of statistical analysis is also, to achieve the predictive element, or the predictive requirement, that is the primary goal of intelligence analysis. Your ability to analyze and predict so as to suggest measures that would enable the prevention of the occurrence of any threatening event. Now let me give you a local example using regression. Now regression is simply a statistical tool that uses comparison. It compares variables, or rather it gives you estimate as to relationship between some variables, usually dependent and independent variables. Now, one of our associate profs came up with a regression formula. Associate Professor Kule Olawumi Jordan came up with a formula, a statistical formula actually, that when used, can be used in analyzing intelligence. How? I would explain. Now, his formula simply makes use of some key variables, to be able to calculate operational peace index. As you can see, the formula, it says 1 over 3 brackets democracy index DI plus CPI, which is corruption perception index, plus 10 brackets HDI, Human Development Index. Now, Democracy Index, Corruption Perception Index, according to him, these are elements that must be present in order for peace to exist. That is, we are saying democracy index, the level at which democracy is thriving in your country determines whether you have peace or not now, right? Corruption perception index. Now, corruption perception index is simply another statistical data that you get, from some other agencies. It's just their own way of calculating the degree of corruption in your country. And also we have the human development index, Now, the human development index simply measures your standard of living, against the cost of living. How good is your country? How well does your government take care of human? How are the humans developing there? Those are some of the things. It takes cognizance of things like cost of living, standard of living, healthcare, education. All those things come under human development. So these are all statistical figures that he took. He tried to regress them and come up with a formula, or rather come up with a formula that would regress them and come up with a figure that, according to him, would determine whether a country would be peaceful or not. And I actually tried to look at these figures against so many other countries. I looked at the operational peace index using this formula of Denmark, for instance. I looked at some countries, and you find out that when you use this formula to calculate and use his benchmark, all the countries that satisfy that benchmark, they are in peace. But for countries that don't meet up the benchmark, they are not at peace. So you can try this out. It's a formula. The R there leaves the possibility of any error. Now, what's the applicability of this in intelligence analysis? As a nation, you sit down and you use such a formula, to calculate, regress these variables and come up with your OPI, operational peace index. And you find out that, okay, by these factors or by these variables, it therefore means that for this year, on the basis of data gotten from this statistical analysis, that Nigeria or any country you're using it on is bound to have problems. What do? You begin to strategize. Now you come up with preventive measures. Our human development index is low, so therefore we should do what? You prefer measures to counter those issues. Your corruption perception index is high, therefore, okay, we have a high level of corruption. What do we do about that in order for us to have peace? Our democracy index, what do we do about that as well? Those are some of the things. So all these are statistical tools at our disposal for intelligence analysis. And mind you, the cardinal aim of intelligence analysis, I keep emphasizing, is for you to be able to predicting to prevent. You predict an event without without preferring measures to prevent it, then your prediction is useless. You predict that rain is going to fall and you don't prevent your clothes outside from getting wet, you don't bring them back to the room, then your prediction is as good as you waste. We also have simple percentage. Now, this is commonly used even in our research works. And how does this apply in intelligence analysis? Now, say you've been given an intelligence requirement to investigate a particular university. Maybe there are reports of sexual harassment in the university, and you decide to pick a disguise of being a researcher. You can just get up one morning, go to the university, and present yourself as a researcher. Request permission to administer some questionnaire to the students. Of course, your questionnaire is going to carry all the questions you want them to answer. You gather a group of girls, sit them down and say, please, they should help you answer these questions. Now, how do you assess those questions? You use statistical tools now, right? You can use all those statistical tools I mentioned, chi-square, correlation, regression, and all of that. But we're looking at simple percentage now, and say at the end of the day your percentage tells you that 80% of the girls say there is sexual harassment in the school, a high level of sexual harassment. What do? You've gotten intel now, right? Reliable intel. 70% or 80% is a high number. You proceed and you probably give feedback and come back. You don't just hear that there's sexual harassment and start arresting everybody within the area. No, you come back to get hard data, and that would depend on your first finding. You could come back as a student, or you could do another research, disguise yourself as a researcher, do some participant observation, and have some in-depth interviews. Those are some of the ways. In a nutshell, it all depends on your ability to analyze data statistically and come up with conclusions, reasonable conclusions and predictions. Now, another model is the Sherman-Kent analytic pyramid. It was developed by Sherman-Kent, and as you can see, it is made up of a wide base of factual information, just like I explained in Linchpin Analysis. That should be the base of your intelligence analysis. You have what? Factual information, and then on the two sides, as you can see, it has assumptions and hypotheses. This simply means that on the basis of factual information, you analyze using assumptions and hypotheses, just like we explained in analysis of competing hypotheses, to enable you arrive at the likely future scenario. Likely there means it has not happened yet. Remember when we talked about the definition of intelligence, I clearly spelled out that the cardinal aim of intelligence is to prevent an event from happening, and the ability of intelligence to forecast an event or to prevent a threat or danger is what makes it qualify as intelligence. So it's quite simple here. You come up with you arrive at factual information, or you obtain factual information, then you use assumption and hypothesis, which I have explained. You can use any models of reasoning or any method of reasoning to arrive at the likely future scenario. It's quite simple. Sherman Kent developed this model of intelligence analysis. Intelligence analysis is a very broad topic, like I explained earlier. We're just giving the introductory lectures for now, because we're taking it as a topic under the course Introduction to Intelligence and Security Studies. We're trying to broaden your mind, give you an intro to all the aspects or all the areas that you're going to be covering, all your 4 years of study. So basically, I think I would have to cut this video in 2 parts to enable you have access to it without having to consume so much of your data, and also to help you understand better. So when you watch this video, lecture video, you can ask questions, and your assignment is there. I would entertain questions on these ones that have been treated, then release the second video, which would cover some of the other ones. I may not cover all, so you would have to read some of those on your own. There are so many other methods of intelligence analysis and techniques, models, so you would read most of them. But the most important thing is that we have given you a working idea of what intelligence analysis is all about, and I would also go further to I have actually introduced you to the cognitive problems that surround intelligence analysis, the mind issue, the mind-body controversy, and all of that. I would also make a very short lecture video on the challenges or the barriers, to intelligence analysis. Shortly, I would send all those videos. So please kindly take your time and digest these ones before the other ones come. Thank you very much. I remain Baba-Ahmadu Abdulaziz, Department of Intelligence and Security Studies of Novena University.